But we're going to continue today with Luke. So it is Luke 18, 1 through 8. If you want to follow along with the scripture on it, it's only 8 verses long, so I have a little narrative retelling of it here that I wrote out that I think will capture some of the nuances going on inside. But you can follow along if you'd like. In the dry, sun-bleached town nestled on the edge of the desert, where wind would howl through narrow alleys and dust would cling to every stone wall, there was a man who lived there that had great power. He was a judge. A man with a sharp glare and even sharper words, known throughout the region not for his kindness or his wisdom or his keen judgment, but for his cold indifference to those that entered into his courtroom. For, you see, he feared neither God nor man, and he made no effort to hide that fact. In his court, a withered little stone building with wide steps and the high pillars that lead up to it, was a place that many people dreaded to enter. To him, justice and his gavel were a tool, something that could be bartered or ignored depending on the day. In that same dusty little town, there lived a widow, a woman whose name no one even bothered to remember or write down, but has clothes that had faded under years of wear and whose eyes had a quiet fire of a suffering that had endured for just a little bit too long. Her husband had died several years before, and she didn't have any male children, leaving her alone to navigate a world that gave little heed to someone in her condition. She had been wronged, though. Perhaps cheated out of some land that should have been left to her, maybe denied some distant inheritance from a kinsman, but no one cared to ask any of the details. What mattered was she had no one to even advocate for her in a courtroom, so she herself, with trembling hands and a spine stiffened by the necessity of her tough life, she walked up the stairs to see this judge. And day after day after day, she would climb the steps of the courthouse, raise her voice among the buzz of the marketplace and the crowds gossiping around her, and yell, "Grant me my justice against my adversary. Vindicate me. Make me righteous." Her voice was raw from the desperation, but the judge had barely looked over towards her. He had something more important to do, more important things to take care of, wealthier men to flatter, influential families to favor in his courtroom, and this woman with her threadbare shawl and her sun-cracked skin was really pretty meaningless. Yet she kept coming. Day after day and morning after morning, she stood before him, unwavering. Her shadow darkened his doorway, her voice echoed through the halls, and she became an annoying little thorn in his side. A ghost he seemingly couldn't banish from his courtroom. At first he ignores her. Then he would scoff. Then he would mutter curses under his breath whenever he saw her even approaching. Until one day, as he sat reclined beneath an olive tree in the courtyard of the courtroom, wiping the sweat from his brow and sipping a little bit of wine, he muttered to himself, "You know, I don't fear God, and I certainly don't care anything about people, but this woman. If I don't do something, she'll hound me till the day I drop dead. Fine. I'll give her what she wants. Just get her off my back." So at last the widow stands in the courtroom and heard the words she had longed for. "You shall have justice. You will be vindicated. You will be made righteous." And she left, not with a triumphant shout, but with the quiet dignity of someone who had carried sorrow and was finally able to set it down. And when Jesus finished telling the story, he turned to those that were listening, men and women in this town that were worn by the life of this existence of the Roman occupation, hoping for signs of God's mercy, and he says, "Do you see what the unjust judge did? Even he gave in. Not out of love or principle, but because of persistence. Now think, how much more will God, who is righteous and good, bring justice to his chosen little ones, who cry out to him day and night. Do you really believe he will delay? I tell you, he will not wait long. Justice will come swift and sure. Jesus then paused, his eyes looking at the crowd and his voice a little bit softer and tinged with a tiny bit of sorrow of knowing what comes next. But when the Son of Man returns, will he find faith like that on earth? In the Gospel of Luke, there are 2 times Jesus is going to tell us these 2 parables that have very familiar sounding themes. We talked about the persistent friend earlier, 2 weeks ago, and this one, the unjust judge with the persistent widow. And while I just tried to put my glasses back on my eyes when I was holding them. And while sometimes the focus of our second parable here is missed because the character of the unjust judge, right? And the fact that Jesus instructs us to listen to what such a man has to say. But both of these parables are very instructive for Christians to be prayerful, but they aim at different targets. In the parable of persistent friend 2 weeks ago, the parable encourages these disciples of Jesus and us today, right, to lift up our daily needs. Remember, this is not an instruction manual about how prayer works. That wasn't what they said. But just, hey, how do we do this? Lifting up prayer and daily needs, right? The physical gifts, the spiritual ones. Jesus takes this cultural taboo, right, of not having something to give to someone and turns it into a way to meditate on the Lord's goodness and prompt us to seek prayer in all of our needs. And a shameless audacity is the word that I use. Pray with shameless audacity. It's not a theological exploration of how prayer works, right? But it's teach us how to pray like you, Jesus. Teach us how to do it. Shameless audacity. Like the parable of the persistent friend, this one involves a cultural situation that we don't know too much about today, even if we think we might. And it's justice for widows. Because most Western nations, right, have an assistance program for people in need. There's churches with food pantries for less privilege. We don't consider this a judicial matter in a lot of things. But in this parable, there's a widow with some adversary who has taken or withheld something from her by which it was her right to have. So it doesn't matter if it was a matter of some piece of property, or even as it's Deuteronomy says, taking a widow's cloak and not returning it to her by the evening. Right? Widows in Israel are treated with very special consideration, including leaving the edges and gleanings of fields for them to go and pick from. Now, there's a reason for this, and we're gonna learn something today, fun, about our ancient people today. Hi, I'm Phil. I'm gonna be your tour guide into ancient Near Eastern patriarchies this morning. Hi. This ancient culture is not derived in what we would have, which is we're a very state-operated a culture. Okay, so if AJ has his old Geo Metro, and he decides he's gonna go on 30. In the morning, and he's driving from Warsaw to Fort Wayne, and he gets to Columbia City, and the light is red, but there's nobody there. So he takes his Geo, going 80 miles an hour, and he blows through that red light. Who stops AJ because he's a danger to the people on the road? Who pulls him over and stops him? Merritt! Well, if he gets to Allen County, right? Who is that? A police officer. Now, the police officers are representative of who? The city or the state or whoever it is, the state. If I were to murder AJ, and we go to courthouse, the title of our little court case would be the who versus Philip Harmon, the versus me, the state. We're very state controlled. In order for me to drive on the road, I've got to go take a test by the BMV, who of course are operated by and they give me this little identifier that has the name of our on it, and the state can pull me over and enforce laws. If I were to become downtrodden and lose my job or these things, I could file for unemployment. That was a trick question. And of course, that's paid by our different unemployment taxes, and so that's the state paying me for that. If I fall on, but the state as the governmental large body, not just the state of Indiana, everyone listening at home too. But if I were to really fall on down times and I need health taken care of in some way, I could apply for disability or Medicaid, right? You with me? We're very state operated. If I fall on down times, it's the state that steps in to help fix it up. It's the state that enforces laws. It's the state that gives you identity. It's you with me. But this is a tribal society, very different in a patriarchal sense. There's a thing called a bet av, which is a great word. Just say bet av. This is the family household. That's what a bet av is. One of the eldest male with all of the people in his household, the descendants underneath, and he's in charge of everyone inside of that entire household, anything that goes on. So if Joseph were to, take the camel and speed down the highway road towards Egypt on his camel going a little too fast, he wouldn't have the state pull him over. It would be an envoy of the bet av, of Jacob, would enforce the regulation. If someone inside the household were to fall on downtrodden times, the household, the bet av, would take them on and take care of them. Now the real problem with this is this word patra, which means father. So this is a patriarchy. So the father is the governance structure, is how it goes through, but it's also patrilineal, which is another fun word. Say patrilineal. Great. This means all inheritance things are passed to the males. So if you ever wondered why Jesus and a lot of these laws speak so much towards widows and orphans, it's because a person who is a widow has lost their only connection to a bet av. And the problem is if they're too old to be remarried, so if you think of the story of Judah and Tamar, Tamar's husband passes, and then so Judah does the rightful thing and tries to marry his second son off to her, but God kills him anyway, there's a whole story with it. You have to keep marrying them off to keep the connection to the bet av. So a widow is someone who is too old to be remarried to be brought back into a household. So widows have no one to connect them to society. It's all through patrilineality. If you have no oldest son, if you never gave birth to a child that was a male, there's no inheritance passed to you. You lose everything and you are excluded from the bet av. Now, since the bet av is essentially the state, they can't get a license, they can't go to court, they can't get assistance, they can't find household, they can't buy land. They don't even get advocates to go to the court for them. Does this make sense? Are you with me with this, where this widow's position really was? She may have been due something, some kin connection somewhere that should have provided her land. She had a lost son from somewhere. She had a distant male relative who had land they were willing to bring her onto, but it had been denied to her. She has no connection to it. She's isolated and lost. Are you with me with her desperation at this point? Does that make sense? Great. In Israel then, judges were expected to be impartial and judge righteously, looking at all of these things. The problem is she has no advocate. Why would I listen to this woman? Not supposed to accept bribes or be intimidated into making a bad decision, to recognize that judgment ultimately belongs to God. You're supposed to follow the divine laws set out in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. There's a set standard by God to execute justice for those who are childless and widowed. God pronounces woes on those who rob widows of their rights and property, and parts of the tithes given to the temple are paid in order to support widows and orphans in the community. This is what the temple was supposed to do. But this judge does not fear God. Now, this Greek word for fear is translated as terror. It's not the kind of fear based in love and respect, which is a different word used through it, but it's this sort of judge that lacks the appropriate terror one should have for bringing forth rulings for the divine. He doesn't fear that he is the advocate for that. He has no respect up for it. He doesn't respect her. It's literally translated, he doesn't turn towards or even face her. He doesn't have the dignity to look at her, is the way that the Hebrew reads in that. This widow has no real recourse of her own. She has no husband. She has no oldest male child. She has no father near enough by. She has no real recourse. She has no legal standing in this context. The assumption that people hearing this parable would have made, and what we should make as well, is that there's no other male that would plead her case or press for her rights, even though she knows she's right. Jesus doesn't specify who this adversary is. He says there's some adversary that has taken something that belongs to her. We don't know what he's done, but it's likely involved she knows something's been pledged to her and it's not been rightfully given to her. He's something about refusing to let her do something that she's been given. Leviticus, she's supposed to be able to pick from my fields. I'm not supposed to take these sort of things, and she's being denied these things. So this widow goes to the judge to get him to execute the judgment that's right. I'm supposed to be able to pick from this field. You with me? This is what we don't know what it is, but there's something there. Justice needs to be executed. And because he ignores her pleas, she keeps on showing up. And so finally, this judge reasons that he will never ever have peace ever again in his life until she gets her ruling. And so even though he doesn't like her, even though he doesn't care for her, he finally rules in her favor. And while the judge gives justice to the widow, in keeping to his own nature, he does it to rid himself of this clamoring. It's not done out of compassion or defensive justice or doing what he knows he should do. It's about himself. There's no fear of God. There's no respect of men. He serves himself. I'm really annoyed by this woman, and so I'll do whatever gets her off my back. He doesn't fear God or men, but does he fear the pestering of this woman? It's there that Jesus draws us into the thoughts and actions of this unjust judge. If an evil judge, because by all accounts, anyone hearing this, like, this judge is bad. You with me? He's not just corrupt, he's spitting in the face of God. If an evil judge like that can make a good ruling, even though he's been forced to, because he's been asked time and time again, how much more perfectly righteous will the judge of all the earth do what's just? This is the question Jesus leaves them with. Now people, me included, sometimes get confused by this. Because God is not being compared in any way to this unjust judge, but he's being contrasted in an extreme way. If evil men can do what's right, how much better and more readily will the God of justice and judge execute justice? Now I hear this, and I think about this parable of the persistent friend. Phil, 2 weeks ago, we talked about this annoying knocking at the door. Is Jesus telling us the exact same parable here? Do we just need to be persistent and keep clamoring at the walls? And I think understanding this parable, at least the way that I think he means us to understand it, requires us to shift our viewpoint a little bit. Because I'm writing this on Monday. I'm going through this, and I was writing and looking at notes, and I have to get up and walk away from my keyboard quite a bit. I put my laptop down, I get up and walk away before coming back to it to keep chewing on how am I supposed to understand this differently than this. Luke provides us both of these parables for some reason. And the difficulty I have with it is that too many times in all my years of hearing people preach in seminary and watching church online and being in church over and over, the reading is the parable of the persistent widow. If you look in your Bible, mine at the very top of page 1769 says, Jesus tells the parable of the persistent widow. It's like how we have the parable of the prodigal son. I think a better title for that is the parable of the unbelievably loving father, because there's really two sons in that one to look at. But we get this persistent widow as though it has anything to do with persistence, striving in prayer. I don't think it does. And I don't think I'm alone in this, because I've been in services time and time again where we are encouraged to storm heaven with our prayers. You've heard this before. We got to just storm heaven with our prayers. We got to assault the kingdom with our prayers, as if we could force God to change his mind. Be more like the widow. Be better than that widow. Storm the courthouse. Pray with faith. Don't ever give up. Try to find the gospel in something like that. Try to find the gospel in that message. It's like trying to hit a finishing nail with the wrong side of a hammer. I can't find the gospel message in that. There's another tool needed to put the nail through on this parable. The gospel should take our old way of doing things and thinking and turn it on its head. And this reading of this parable really is no different. Because we want to read this as, if at first you don't succeed, try again. It's almost there, but what we try is the absolute opposite of what the widow really does. Our first mistake we make most of the time with this parable is we assume that Jesus intends for us to think about our relationship to God as like the widow to the judge. One that hears her petitions, and if she pesters him just long enough, right? If we fall into that ditch of this parable, it's difficult to see the gospel message in it. So God is an unloving judge that I have to pester into loving. Do you see the problem we run into? The key to avoiding it is in what the widow actually says. This is the key to the whole thing. And I've translated it a couple different ways because there's a lot of ways to read it, but I want you to repeat these after me. This is the rough translation of what she says to the judge over and over. She says, "Vindicate me." I think the more clear way of translating that little bit is, "Declare me righteous." So say it, "Declare me righteous." And that is the beginning of the tool we can use to put the hammer through the wall, the nail through the wall. We can turn the hammer around the right way. Because here's the deal with this, the difference between this judge and this woman and our relationship up. Because God has already declared you righteous. Ooh. The cross is the court order declaring victory over my unrighteousness. It's already done. Your court case is closed. So I'm not the petitioner asking to be vindicated in some new way. Vindicate me. Declare me righteous. I'm empowered to take my vindication, my righteousness that I've been given through the cross, into the streets to minister in the full assurance that I have been made righteous. That every person I meet, it's already accomplished. I can hold up my document declaring it and command it to release the hold that I have on my lack of righteousness. Anyone who tries to cheat me, I declare what's already true in the eyes of heaven. I'm out to command brokenness from other people, not from myself. I don't pray for endless vindication. I pray for I don't pray for vindication. I pray from a place of vindication. I pray from a place of righteousness. I don't pray for a victory. I pray from a place of victory. Does this make sense? It's hard for me to continue to pray as though victory is mine when I see around me and it doesn't look like that, though. You can feel pretty foolish and quit. When you get into that little trap of seeing the world that way, it's easy to grab your ball peen hammer the wrong way again and cry out for vindication and righteousness in yourself. There's the old joke. This is like almost blasphemous, I feel like, at this point. Holy cow. I just thought about it, though. You know the Hail Mary? You know the Hail Mary. You know the prayer? Hail Mary, full of grace, help me find a parking space, right? No, that's not it? Darn. But you know those prayers. You've been at the mall. Well, no one goes to the mall anymore. But you've been driving around and you're like, sweet baby Jesus, if I don't find a parking space in the next 5 seconds. You've done it. You know what I mean. You know those prayers, right? I prayed for healing for 2 of my friends, and only one of them made it. God is good because this thing I wanted became on sale. That's proof of God right there. You know these little moments. If God can help people find things that are on sale, why doesn't He spend time doing things that seem more important, like taking care of earthquakes, famine, and sickness? When you think about God, when you hear the name, you got to think what image pops into your mind. The old man with the long white beard sitting behind a curtain, pulling levers like the Wizard of Oz, healing some, finding parking spaces for certain people, healing this friend, letting your other friend die. He's just pulling the levers. Is He the unrighteous judge? You see this image suddenly here? For many people, this image of God is one that's outside of everything. Essentially somewhere else. He's made the world, but he stands back and he watches it from this vantage point. A God who's there and only sometimes comes here if you pester him just long enough, if you pray the right things, or if it's something he can do easily. You just rip this lever and the guy in front of you pulls out and boom, you have a parking space. See what I mean? He's made the world and he stands back. The problem with that concept, just like comparing God to this unrighteous judge, is that you have to then prove that a good God exists from that. Isn't that so horrible? We start with a real life. We start with this thing, and we can agree that the God exists, maybe, but people argue and discuss whether there's a God somewhere, and why does he do these things and that thing. But the Bible seems far less interested in proving that God exists, and more interested in trying to prove what God is like this parable. He's unlike this judge in any way. Exodus 3:14. God says to Moses, Achaya aser achaya, I am who I am. It's an eternal phrase. It's translated in all tenses because anyway, in Hebrew, I am who I am who I was who I am that I am. You can translate it a million ways. When Moses hears God's voice, he doesn't see a shape or form. In Deuteronomy, you saw no form of any kind the day the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the fire. Watch yourself carefully that you don't become corrupt and make yourself an idol or in any shape or formed like a man or woman or like an animal on earth or bird or any creature or fish or the waters below. There's no form, there's no shape. God's beyond anything out of the minds that Moses or any of us can comprehend. It's hard to wrap our minds around. And if I believe that God is listening and God is involved, but I find the relationship hard to comprehend. What does it mean to love a God like that? Rob Bell one time put it like this, that God is kind of like a song. A song that moves you with melody, a groove, and a rhythm. And people have heard this song for a long time. And there have been people who say that the song doesn't exist and deny the music that's around them, but anyway, the song will keep playing. I always love that description that Rob gives. Essentially then, Jesus in the Gospels comes to show us how to live in tune with that song, to understand it and see it. All these parables peel the curtain back and help us read the music a little bit better. He's the way, the truth, the life. He came to show us reality at its most raw and how things are. Jesus takes on this melody in flesh and blood and generosity and compassion, and this becomes our image of what God is like. In his telling of the truth, we reveal what God is. In his love and forgiveness and sacrifice, this is what God is. Unlike this horrific judge, this is who God is. That's how the song sounds. The question is not whether or not you play the song. The question is, are you in tune enough to understand and be in partnership with it? As we would say here, my favorite chapter in the entire Bible, and I say this, I used to say this many times more, is 1 John 4, verse 8. So our mission statement here is know God, love neighbor, live justice forever. And 1 John 4, 8 gives us one of those. Anyone who doesn't love God, anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. Unrestrained, unconditional. So when you see someone sacrifice themselves for another person, for the well-being of another, they're playing in tune. An infinite, massive, invisible God is hard to get our minds around. But the truth of love, grace, and mercy, and justice and compassion, the way that Jesus lives, we can see that. We can understand that. We can relate to it, and we can do it too. So the question is, can you come to see the song that's written? And can you get in tune with it? Realize the relationship between you and the living God, not between one behind the scenes pulling levers that you must pester with prayers, but grab a different tool. You argue from a place of vindication, a place of righteousness. Can we get in tune with what God has delivered on the cross? A relationship in a way that's hard to explain. If we can stick to that truth, if we can pray from that truth, that's the faith that the Son of Man hopes to see when he comes back. That's the faith he's looking for. Let's pray.